The San Lorenzo market in Florence is a living, breathing labyrinth of tradition and sensory overload, a place where the ancient soul of the city persists amidst the constant flow of modern life. On this particular winter morning, the air beneath the heavy iron rafters is a complex tapestry of scents, dominated by the robust, earthy aroma of dark roasted coffee and the pungent, raw smell of expensive leather goods being unloaded from wooden crates. But beneath these familiar smells, a new and agonizing fragrance begins to rise from the cold, damp ground, the cloying, sweet, and shattered scent of hundreds of fresh red roses, their delicate petals bleeding their essence into the mud. The rhythmic, chaotic symphony of the market is suddenly punctuated by a sharp, dry sound, the unmistakable crack of a hand-woven wicker basket splintering under the weight of a heavy, polished leather boot. The boot belongs to Lorenzo, the arrogant heir of a rival family, a man who walks with the reckless, unearned confidence of those who believe that bloodline is a substitute for character. He does not merely step over the obstacle. He pauses to grind his heel into the delicate red blooms, a visceral and unnecessary display of dominance directed at Bianca, the orphan flower girl who holds this small corner of the street as her only sanctuary. Lorenzo's laughter is a harsh, discordant sound that echoes off the surrounding stone walls, a hollow noise that reveals the profound insecurity hidden beneath his expensive tailoring. He watches with a cruel, detached amusement as the vibrant red petals are churned into the gray, freezing slush of the street, effectively destroying the girl's entire livelihood in a matter of seconds. To Lorenzo, this is nothing more than a minor diversion, a low-stakes game of power intended to remind the small merchants of San Lorenzo who truly commands the shadows of the market. He believes that by crushing the roses, he is asserting his inevitable control over the very cobblestones they rest upon. A few yards away, seated on a weathered stone bench that has seen centuries of Florentine history, Dante Medici observes the scene with a stillness that is entirely unnatural. He holds a morning newspaper in his massive, calloused hands, his eyes appearing to scan the headlines, though he has not turned a single page in over 20 minutes. Dante is a monolith of suppressed, lethal energy, his presence casting a long and intimidating shadow that seems to draw the warmth out of the winter sun. He is wrapped in the heavy, familiar sense of his own authority, the aroma of noble leaf tobacco, the sharp, clean scent of mountain cedar, and the persistent, biting cold that emanates from a man who understands that true power is not found in noise, but in the silence that follows a decision. As the laughter of the rival heir continues to grate against the quiet dignity of the market, Dante slowly and methodically rotates the heavy gold signet ring on his right ring finger. The movement is fluid and hypnotic, a silent ritual of focus that marks the transition from observation to action. The polished gold of the Medici crest catches the dull, pale winter sun, reflecting a sharp and blinding flash of light that strikes the damp street like a promise of inevitable retribution. Dante does not look at Lorenzo, nor does he offer a word of comfort to the girl. He simply watches the destruction, his dark eyes recording every micro-expression of the heir's arrogance and every tremor of Bianca's hands. The onlookers in the market hold their breath, sensing that the atmospheric pressure in San Lorenzo has shifted towards something catastrophic. They see the crushed roses and the mocking air, and they assume they are witnessing a simple tragedy of the streets. They do not realize that the man on the stone bench is already calculating the cost of every bruised petal and every splinter of wicker. Lorenzo believes he has won a minor victory in a long-standing feud, oblivious to the fact that his display of cruelty has just provided Dante with the perfect justification to rewrite the laws of the district. They thought destroying her livelihood was a power game. Dante Medici decided that if they wanted to step on something precious, he would give them something they would never be able to possess. The harsh, discordant echoes of Lorenzo's laughter eventually fade into the cavernous rafters of the San Lorenzo market, leaving behind a silence that feels far more heavy and oppressive than the noise that preceded it. Dante Medici remains anchored to the weathered stone bench, a monolith of dark charcoal wool and suppressed fury, his eyes never leaving the grotesque tableau of the mud-stained street. The air around him continues to pulse with the complex olfactory history of the district, the bitterness of roasted coffee, and the animalistic tang of raw leather. But for Dante, every other scent is secondary to the sweet, agonizing perfume of the hundreds of roses currently being suffocated by the gray winter slush. He looks at the vibrant red petals, now torn and scattered across the damp cobblestones, and he does not see a simple loss of inventory for a street merchant. To the dawn of Florence, these crushed blooms are a visceral, physical reopening of a wound that has never truly healed, a wound that resides in the deepest, coldest chambers of the Palazzo Medici. Dante's massive, calloused hand continues its slow and methodical rotation of the heavy gold signet ring on his right ring finger, the metal catching the dull, winter light with a rhythmic, hypnotic precision. As the ring turns against his scarred skin, the marketplace around him begins to dissolve, replaced by the ghost of a garden that no longer exists in its full glory. He remembers his son, Marco, a child whose hands were once stained not with blood or ink, but with the rich, dark soil of the palazzo's inner courtyard. He remembers the way Marco would kneel for hours, his small face etched with a look of absolute, pure concentration as he tried to plant a specific row of roses before the first signs of his illness began to manifest. Those flowers were meant to be a gift of life, a splash of color in a home that had grown increasingly gray with the responsibilities of the Medici Empire. But the fever had been faster than the roots. Dante had watched those roses wither in the sun while his son withered in a silk-sheeted bed, and since that night, the sight of a destroyed flower has become synonymous with the fragility of everything he holds sacred. He looks at Bianca, the orphan flower girl, who is currently standing in the center of the street with her head bowed, her small frame a study in silent, resilient grief. To the rest of the market, she is a nameless girl selling a temporary luxury, but to Dante, she represents the only color that remains in a city increasingly defined by shadows and compromise. He governs Florence through a cold, calculated fear, but he understands better than any man alive that he can only truly live through the respect of those who recognize his hidden, internal code. By crushing Bianca's roses, Lorenzo has not just performed an act of petty street thuggery, he has committed a profound act of sacrilege against the memory of Marco's lost beauty. Lorenzo believes he is asserting his family's dominance over the cobblestones, but he is actually demonstrating a level of cowardice that Dante finds entirely unforgivable, the cowardice of a man who mistakes the destruction of beauty for the acquisition of power. The persistent cold that emanates from Dante Medici is not a product of the winter air, but a reflection of the glacial-focused judgment he has just passed upon the rival air. He inhales the scent of his own presence, the noble leaf tobacco, and the mountain cedar, allowing it to ground him in the absolute certainty of his next move. He knows that his palace is filled with gold, with masterpieces of the Renaissance, and with a history written in the blood of kings, yet none of it could bring back the warmth of his son's laughter. He sees in Bianca's ruined basket a mirror of his own inability to protect the innocent from the fires of reality, and the fury building within his chest is a controlled, tectonic force. He is not an impulsive man. He is a strategist who understands that a simple physical retaliation would be a waste of the opportunity Lorenzo has just provided. Dante Medici is not just going to punish a rival, he is going to create a physical manifestation of his respect for the girl and his contempt for the man who dared to walk through her roses. The heavy, winter silence of the San Lorenzo market is broken only by the rhythmic, hollow dripping of melting ice from the iron rafters, a sound that counts the seconds of Bianca's public humiliation. Lorenzo remains standing over her, his polished leather boots still resting near the mangled remains of the wicker basket he just destroyed. He expects the girl to break, to dissolve into the frantic, high-pitched sobs of a victim, providing him with the pathetic spectacle he craves to validate his own sense of superiority. He watches her with a sneer that is as sharp as a blade, waiting for the moment her spirit collapses under the weight of her lost livelihood. But as the seconds stretch into an agonizing minute, the expected breakdown never occurs. Bianca does not cry. She does not offer Lorenzo the satisfaction of a single tear or a plea for mercy. Instead, she slowly and deliberately lowers herself to the cold, damp ground, her small frame a study in absolute, bone-deep resilience. With hands that are visibly trembling from the biting winter cold and the shock of the assault, Bianca begins the painstaking task of reclaiming what is left of her world. She reaches into the freezing, gray slush of the street, her fingers brushing against the vibrant red petals that have been churned into the mud. She collects the bruised blooms one by one, treating the ruined flowers with a level of tenderness that stands in direct, devastating contrast to Lorenzo's brutality. Each movement is slow, methodical, and filled with a quiet dignity that seems to draw the very light out of the winter sun. She is not just gathering inventory. She is attempting to salvage the fragments of her father's legacy from the filth of the gutter. To the casual observer, she is merely a girl cleaning the street, but to the man watching from the stone bench, she is a warrior performing a ritual of defiance. Dante Medici continues to rotate the heavy gold signet ring on his right ring finger, his dark eyes recording every micro-expression of the girl's stoicism. He understands the underlying geography of Lorenzo's hatred, a bitterness that spans far beyond a simple dispute over street space in the market. Luca's early reports and Dante's own vast memory of the city's lineages provide the missing pieces of the puzzle. Lorenzo's family, the rivals who believe they can purchase the soul of Florence with their new and loud money, had tried for years to break Bianca's father. He was an artisan of the old school, a man whose hands possessed a genius for leatherwork and gold that no machine could ever replicate. He had refused, time and again, to work for the rivals, choosing to live in poverty rather than betray the traditions of the guilds or the silent allegiances he held to the older families of the city. Lorenzo's hatred for the orphan girl is the inherited venom of a man whose father was told no by a peasant. He sees in Bianca's stubborn presence at the market a living reminder of his own family's failure to buy absolute loyalty. By crushing her roses, he believes he is finally erasing the last trace of her father's insolence, effectively proving that anything which cannot be bought must be destroyed. He watches her gather the petals with a growing, frustrated rage, unable to understand why she will not look up and acknowledge his power. He shouts a final, jagged insult at her back, a comment about the worthlessness of her father and the inevitable fate of those who do not know their place, before turning on his heel and marching away with his sycophantic guards. Dante Medici does not move. He inhales the scent of his mountain cedar and noble leaf tobacco, his gaze fixed on the girl as she finishes gathering the last of the ruined red petals. He realizes in this moment that loyalty is not something that is taught. It is something that runs through the blood, a biological imperative that survives even when everything else is stripped away. Bianca is not merely an orphan selling flowers. She is the daughter of a man who understood the value of his own soul, and she is currently carrying that same iron weight in her own small chest. Dante feels a profound, silent respect for the girl, a recognition that she possesses a quality of character that the wealthy heirs of the city will never be able to possess, no matter how many bespoke suits they buy. The catalyst has been fully activated, and the Dawn of Florence has decided that the street beneath Bianca's feet is no longer worthy of her resilience. The gray, winter light of Florence begins to slant through the high, iron-ribbed roof of the San Lorenzo market, casting long, skeletal shadows across the damp cobblestones where the ghost of Bianca's roses still lingers in the freezing air. The market continues its relentless, daily grind. The shouts of vendors, the heavy thud of leather crates, and the rhythmic hiss of espresso machines. But for Dante Medici, the world remains concentrated on the small, shivering figure of the girl who is still painstakingly salvaging her dignity from the mud. The atmosphere is a heavy, suffocating blend of dark roasted coffee and the pungent, animalistic tang of raw leather, but it is the sweet, decaying scent of the crushed roses that remains the dominant olfactory note in Dante's immediate periphery. He remains seated on the weathered stone bench, his dark charcoal wool coat absorbing the cold of the morning, while his thumb moves in a slow, hypnotic circle around the heavy gold signet ring on his right ring finger. The metal catches the pale, filtered sun, reflecting a promise of retribution that the bustling crowd is too preoccupied to notice. Luca, approaches with the silent, spectral efficiency of a predator moving through tall grass, his presence almost entirely undetectable to anyone but the Don himself. He does not sit, nor does he offer a formal greeting. He simply leans against the cold stone pillar behind Dante, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that barely carries over the din of the market. Luca has spent the last hour excavating the hidden financial architecture behind Lorenzo's public display of brutality, and the revelations come in waves, each one colder and more calculated than the last. The first wave reveals the crushing reality of Bianca's existence, that she is not just struggling against the winter cold, but against a mountain of inherited debt that Lorenzo's family has been carefully cultivating to use as a lever. They have been squeezing the girl's small supply chain, inflating the cost of her blooms, and bribing the local authorities to increase her stall fees, all to ensure that she eventually collapses under the weight of a poverty she did not choose. The second wave of revelation is what causes the air around Dante to grow noticeably colder, his presence expanding until it seems to pull the very oxygen from the market floor. Luca uncovers the true scale of Lorenzo's ambition. The rival heir is not merely interested in a petty street feud, he is attempting a hostile takeover of the entire historic block. Lorenzo has been secretly buying up the deeds to the surrounding shops, using intimidation and predatory loans to force out the generational leather workers and cafe owners who have occupied San Lorenzo for centuries. His ultimate goal is to erase the soul of the district, tearing down the ancient stone facades to construct a sprawling, high-stakes casino that would cater to the nouveau rich and poison the traditional heart of Florence. Bianca's flower stall is the final, stubborn obstacle in his path, a small patch of sacred ground that refuses to be bought, standing as a silent testament to her father's refusal to surrender to the rival's greed. The third wave of Luca's investigation clarifies the visceral nature of the morning's assault, revealing that the destruction of the roses was not a random act of cruelty, but a meticulously planned psychological execution. Lorenzo knew that, by crushing the most delicate and beautiful thing in the market in broad daylight, he was sending a clear message to every other merchant on the street. If he could destroy the innocent so casually, he could easily dismantle their lives as well. It was a public warning designed to break the collective spirit of the community, a demonstration that under the new order Lorenzo intended to build, beauty and tradition would be treated as nothing more than debris to be ground into the slush. The roses were a surrogate for the people themselves, a blood-red omen of what would happen to anyone who dared to stand in the way of the casino's construction. Dante Medici inhales the deep, grounding scent of mountain cedar and noble leaf tobacco, his dark eyes reflecting a lethal and focused clarity as he absorbs the finality of Luca's findings. He is a man who understands that in the grand game of power, real estate is merely a proxy for influence, and he recognizes that Lorenzo has made the fatal mistake of underestimating the value of the ground beneath his feet. Dante is never impulsive, but he is fundamentally immovable once a decision has been forged in the crucible of his own moral code. He looks at the gold and leather of his own legacy and decides that the San Lorenzo block will never change hands. It will never be surrendered to a gambling house or the sterile arrogance of the rival family. He has seen enough of the world's beauty destroyed by men who believe that everything has a price, and as he rotates his signet ring one final time, he prepares a countermove that will not just protect the girl, but will humiliate Lorenzo with a display of wealth so absolute that it makes the rival's ambition look like the work of a child playing in the dirt. The next morning at the San Lorenzo market does not arrive with the soft, restorative light of a typical Tuscan spring, but with the clinical and unforgiving clarity of a winter sun that seems to freeze the very shadows against the ancient stone facades of Florence. The air, already heavy with the persistent, earthy scent of dark roasted coffee and the animalistic tang of raw leather, now carries a new, vibrating charge of static electricity, a profound premonition that the natural order of the district is about to be permanently and violently rewritten. Lorenzo arrives early, flanked by his personal security detail, and enveloped in an aura of premature triumph, fully believing that the heavy silence of the local merchants is a definitive signal of their absolute submission to his predatory real estate plans. He walks across the damp cobblestones with the reckless, unearned arrogance of a man who thinks the very ground he treads upon already belongs to him by right of conquest, entirely oblivious to the fact that the true sovereign of these stones is about to transform the street into a monument of his humiliation. Dante Medici walks into the center of the street at the exact moment the market begins to pulse with the rhythmic movement of the first customers. He does not arrive with drawn weapons or a legion of armed mercenaries to initiate a bloody confrontation. Instead, he brings the absolute, crushing weight of a fortune so vast that it renders physical violence a primitive and unnecessary tool of the past. The sound that announces his arrival is not the sharp crack of gunfire, but the deep, industrial roar of heavy, reinforced trucks maneuvering with calculated difficulty through the narrow medieval alleys, their vibrations shaking the very foundations of the centuries-old buildings. Dante remains standing directly in Lorenzo's path, his massive frame radiating that persistent, authoritative cold that seems to absorb the remaining warmth from the winter air, while his thumb rotates the gold signet ring on his right ring finger with a calm that precedes a financial earthquake. The gold of the ring catches the dull, pale winter sun, reflecting a blinding promise of a retribution that Lorenzo is not yet capable of comprehending in its true, devastating scale. Under Dante's silent and immovable orders, the trucks begin to discharge their specialized cargo, not common construction debris or gravel, but a molten, shimmering alloy of gold and polished brass that glows with an almost divine intensity under the cold morning sky. In front of a paralyzed Lorenzo and the gathering crowd of hundreds, Dante's engineering teams begin to cover the worn, mud-stained cobblestones with the liquid metal, meticulously filling every crack, every crevice, and every historical scar of the street with a brilliance that physically blinds the onlookers. The act of paving the street with gold is not merely a display of grotesque excess. It is a clinical and perfectly executed financial chess move designed to transform Bianca's place of work into a royal path, elevating the orphan flower girl from a street victim to a protected sovereign of her own domain. The contrast between the filth and roses crushed in the mud the day before and the shimmering, metallic road of today is a silent, definitive declaration that in Dante Medici's world, beauty has a value that no debt or casino can ever hope to surpass. The silence that descends upon the San Lorenzo Square is described as the weight of a wealth that makes the arrogance of others entirely irrelevant. Lorenzo, who only 24 hours earlier felt like a giant for crushing a wicker basket of roses, now appears minuscule and pathetic against the backdrop of a wealth he can neither replicate nor understand. He watches, his face a mask of pale shock, and his voice choked by the sudden, sickening perception of his own insignificance as the molten alloy solidifies, sealing the fate of his ambitious gambling house forever. Dante does not utter a single word of insult or a theatrical threat. He simply observes the metal as it cools, transforming the humble market street into a permanent urban jewel under the absolute protection of the Medici crest. The sheer grandiosity of the scene is felt through the profound shock of the merchants and the common people, who realize that Dante's authority does not reside in the volume of his voice, but in the glacial, terrifying calm with which he can literally alter the physical nature of the world beneath his enemies' feet. As the gold alloy pavement settles into its final, shimmering form, Dante turns his gaze toward Bianca, who watches the transformation with hands that are still trembling, but no longer from the cold of fear. This madness displayed by the Don is, in reality, a surgical execution of power that establishes a new and immutable standard of justice within the market. He has effectively proven that if Lorenzo wished to step on something precious, he must now contend with a physical foundation so valuable that any attempt at future vandalism would be considered a crime against the very treasury of the city. Lorenzo's paper empire begins to disintegrate under the reflected glare of the new street, and Dante's continued silence remains the most devastating force in the square, a promise that from this moment forward, the ground does not belong to those who crush it, but to those whom the Lion of Florence has chosen to lift above the shadows. The molten alloy of gold and polished brass has finally cooled into a shimmering, mirror-like expanse that stretches from one end of the San Lorenzo market to the other, forever sealing the mud and the memories of the previous day's cruelty beneath a layer of absolute, physical wealth. Dante Medici stands at the center of this new, metallic road, his massive frame appearing as a dark, immovable silhouette against the reflected brilliance of the morning sun. He does not reach for a weapon or signal for his men to initiate a physical confrontation. He understands that the total annihilation of a rival like Lorenzo requires a more sophisticated form of execution, one that targets the very foundation of his social and financial standing. Dante continues the methodical, hypnotic rotation of the heavy gold signet ring on his right ring finger, the metal catching the light and reflecting a promise of retribution that has now been fully realized. The air around the Don remains saturated with his imposing presence, the scent of noble leaf tobacco, mountain cedar, and that persistent, biting cold that emanates from a man who governs by fear but survives through the absolute respect of the city. Luca emerges from the shadow of the ancient stone pillars, moving with a spectral and lethal efficiency as he carries several heavy leather folders embossed with the official seal of the Florentine notary. Under Dante's quiet and immovable gaze, the financial destruction of Lorenzo's ambition begins with a surgical precision that leaves no room for resistance. Dante has not merely paved the street with gold to protect Bianca's stall. He has spent the last several hours orchestrating a total, strategic takeover of the entire historical block. While Lorenzo was busy dreaming of casinos and crushing flowers, Dante's legal teams were acquiring the deeds to every single shop, every narrow apartment, and every commercial license on the street. With a final, deliberate signature performed over the hood of his vehicle, Dante Medici officially transfers the ownership of the entire district into the name of Bianca, the orphan flower girl. The movement is a masterstroke of financial warfare that transforms Lorenzo's predatory real estate portfolio into a collection of worthless documents, effectively stripping him of his influence over San Lorenzo in a single, silent stroke. The silence that descends upon the square is described as the weight of a wealth that makes the arrogance of others entirely irrelevant. Lorenzo stands paralyzed on the edge of the new gold pavement, his face a mask of pale shock as he realizes that he is no longer a titan of the district, but a trespasser on ground that now belongs to the girl he tried to destroy. His laughter has been replaced by a sickening realization of his own insignificance, as the other merchants and families of Florence observe his humiliation with a cold, detached contempt. Lorenzo has lost the respect of his peers not because he was defeated by force, but because he was publicly outmatched and bought out by a gesture of generosity that his hollow, greedy mind could never hope to replicate. He has become a social pariah, a man whose attempt at power was crushed by the sheer grandiosity of a man who values the dignity of a flower girl more than the profit of a casino. Dante Medici begins to walk slowly toward the broken air, his heavy, methodical footsteps echoing off the gold alloy street with a sound that carries the finality of a tomb door closing. He stops just inches from Lorenzo, his broad shoulders filling the rival's entire field of vision, his fragrance of cedar and tobacco acting as a suffocating reminder of his dominance. Dante does not raise his voice. His authority is felt in the glacial, terrifying calm of his words as he delivers the final judgment. He tells Lorenzo that he stepped on Bianca's roses because he believed the street was cheap and the girl was disposable, but he has now made a catastrophic error in calculation. Dante informs the pallid air that from this moment forward, if he ever wishes to walk upon these cobblestones or conduct business in this district again, he will have to humble himself and ask permission from a queen. He gestures toward Bianca, who now stands as the legal and moral sovereign of the market that Lorenzo tried to steal. The resolution is absolute, and the protection afforded to Bianca is now etched into the very architecture of the city. The flower girl who was once made to weep in the mud now governs the market from a path of gold, her future secured by the Medici crest and her own unyielding resilience. Lorenzo is forced to retreat, stumbling away from the shimmering street under the silent, judging gaze of the people he tried to intimidate. Dante Medici does not offer a second glance at the retreating rival. His work in San Lorenzo is finished. He has proven that gold cannot buy class, but it can certainly be used to pave a path for the innocent while burying the arrogant beneath its weight. As he prepares to leave the square, the scent of crushed roses has finally been replaced by the smell of cooling metal and the absolute, undisturbed peace of a street that has been reclaimed by honor. The winter sun begins its slow, agonizing descent over the terracotta rooftops of Florence, casting long, bruised shadows that stretch across the ancient stones of the San Lorenzo district. The gold-paved street, now a permanent and shimmering scar of retribution amidst the gray architecture, catches the final amber rays of the day, reflecting a brilliance that seems to push back against the approaching night. The atmospheric scent of the market has undergone a profound transformation. The sweet and agonizing perfume of the hundreds of crushed roses has finally begun to dissipate, replaced by the cooling, metallic tang of the new road and the lingering, dominant presence of Dante Medici. As the Don walks toward his waiting vehicle, the air around him remains saturated with the scent of noble leaf tobacco, mountain cedar, and that persistent, biting cold that follows a man who has just rewritten the history of a city block without firing a single shot. Dante remains a monolith of suppressed energy, his massive frame appearing even more imposing in the dying light. He pauses at the edge of the gold alloy pavement, his thumb performing one final, methodical rotation of the heavy gold signet ring on his right ring finger. The metal catches the dull glow of the evening, a silent promise that the protection he has established today is as immovable as the stones themselves. He is never impulsive, and the act of paving the street with gold was never a simple display of wealth, but a calculated movement of financial chess designed to humiliate the rival family while elevating the orphan flower girl to a position of absolute sovereignty. Dante looks at the merchants, who are now coming out of their shops to touch the metal, and he realizes that the geography of power in Florence has fundamentally shifted. Lorenzo has not only lost a real estate battle, he has destroyed himself through his own unearned arrogance, losing the respect of every noble family in the city by proving he could be publicly outmatched by a gesture of pure, strategic generosity. For Dante, the victory is not found in the acquisition of property, but in the preservation of the only color that remains in a city increasingly defined by shadows. He thinks of Bianca, who is now the legal owner of the district, and he sees in her resilience a mirror of the beauty he could not save in his own son, Marco. He understands that while the world is often a place of mud and violence, there is a specific, lethal justice in ensuring that those who try to crush the small are eventually forced to look up at them from the gutter. The gold beneath their feet is a physical manifestation of his internal code, a reminder that in the Medici Empire, innocence is the most valuable asset, and it is the only thing worth the absolute expenditure of a fortune. As the armored SUV glides away from the market and begins the ascent toward the Palazzo Medici, the silence inside the vehicle is deep and contemplative. Dante watches the city pass by through the tinted glass, his mind already moving toward the next conflict. He knows that his actions in San Lorenzo will invite a different kind of scrutiny from the rival factions, but his primary concern remains the inner sanctum of his own home. Upon arriving at the massive, iron-studded gates of the palazzo, Dante is met with a shift in the atmosphere that he did not anticipate. The scent of cedar and tobacco within the stone corridors feels heavier, and the usual clockwork efficiency of his household seems to falter for the first time in years. He enters the private library, where the housekeeper, the woman who has served as the silent, iron-willed pillar of the Medici residence since before Marco was born, is waiting for him. She is a woman of immense control and maturity, someone Dante has always viewed as indestructible, yet today, she stands in the shadows of the bookshelves with a posture that betrays a sudden and terrifying fragility. There is a slight tremor in her hands as she holds a silver tray, and her eyes, usually as sharp as flint, carry a profound, hidden sorrow that mirrors the very cold Dante has carried since the fever took his son. This sudden crack in the armor of the woman who maintains his world is a hook into a new kind of darkness, suggesting that the next threat to the Medici legacy may not come from a rival family or a corporate merger, but from a secret buried deep within the heart of his own house. Dante Medici takes a slow breath, the scent of mountain cedar grounding him, as he prepares to face this new, intimate vulnerability. He realizes that while he can pave an entire street with gold to protect a stranger, the people who serve as his own foundation require a different kind of strength to remain whole. The lessons of the market have proven that wealth is a tool, but loyalty is the only true currency that can withstand the winter. Gold does not buy class, but it protects the innocence of those who possess it. If you are loyal to Dante's justice, subscribe. Stay loyal.